Hello, thank you for tuning in to the Rogue Monkey podcast. We are here to share inspiring stories, lessons, and wisdom to keep you moving forwards on your own path. This week, we've got another amazing guest that you won't want to miss in the incredible Tiana Gordon. A professional rugby player and founder of Peak Team Performance, Tiana shares her journey from being a former competitive swimmer before starting rugby at university through to her current role in empowering coaches and athletes. She discusses the importance of coaching relationships, the impact of social connection on performance, and her mission to optimise athlete well-being. Tiana reflects on her experiences in high-performance environments and emphasises the need for balance between performance and mental health. The conversation also explores the coaching landscape and the significance of community building amongst coaches. It's a diverse and vibrant conversation, and we really hope you enjoy it as much as we did recording it. So here we go, as we are joined by Tiana Gordon for the latest episode of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Hello, Tiana. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yourself, how are you?
Yeah, really good. Really excited for this chat. I know we've spoke previously and kind of trying to pick the different avenues that we're going to explore. But for the uninitiated, do you want to give our listeners and viewers just a little bit of an introduction as to who you are and a little bit about your kind of professional and your sporting journey?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Tiana Gordon. I'm currently a Premiership rugby player at Leicester Tigers and also the founder of Peak Team Performance. We specialise in empowering coaches to unlock peak athlete well-being as well as performance through optimising coach-athlete relationships and team dynamics. I'm also a daughter, sister, auntie, girlfriend, and friend to some pretty incredible people.
Wow. Okay. Plenty of things for us to explore. But I guess I'm curious. Obviously, rugby plays a huge part in your life, and for a lot of aspiring young athletes, there, perhaps they don't know what the leap looks like from where they are now to kind of where you are. So, where did that journey start for you, and what was the I guess the journey from the hobby, and this could be quite good fun and school and all those sorts of things, to kind of where it is now?
Yeah. I actually started rugby quite late. I started rugby at uni. And I ended up just going to a give it a go session. At uni they have the freshers fairs and when you start, so there's all the different societies and you go around and everyone's trying to pitch for you to join, right? And the women's rugby team there were offering free Haribos, which I'm a sucker for. So I went over to get some free Haribos, not intending to go, and they were like, "Yeah, give it a go. You look like you could be good, etc." And I went to the give it a go session, and yeah, I loved it. I knew nothing really about rugby before that, despite being from Northampton. Obviously, we have a very good established team in Northampton Saints. But yeah, my journey started at uni, and I remember, I think it was in my first year, Claire Purdy came in and did a session with us, and she said she also started at 18. I was like, oh, okay, maybe we can push this and see where we can go. And that was the start.
Do you know what's fascinating? We've had, so many different athletes on the podcast, and, to hear people talking about starting a sport so late, I'm reflecting back to, well, for our 100th episode, we had Lucy Charles Barkley on, and she transitioned again in her late teens, early 20s into the sport of triathlon. And,
Oh, wow.
obviously that's, gone really well for her. So I think it is fascinating that perhaps there's still this culture in certain sports where it feels like at 12 you have to have made it, whatever that is, and you have to be engaged in knowing what you want to do. And actually it's, what we're talking about today, like it's okay just to explore, see what's what, and even in your late teens go, oh, maybe I'll give this a try and we'll see what happens. And it seems to have worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think even within the rugby space, girls are starting younger and younger now. So you've got some 18-year-olds on the PWRC and that are absolutely incredible already. So there is that feel of you need to start younger to be able to have a chance. But I agree with what you said, and just having the curiosity if it's something you're interested in and you think you can enjoy, just start, and you never know where it's going to lead to,
Well, I'm obviously keen as well to dive into the peak team performance side of things, but I just want to touch a little bit on coaching to start with, because again, those early experiences with a sport, irrelevant of your age,
Mm,
the experience that you have is predominantly driven by the person leading that session. So I don't know if
yeah.
you just want to talk a little bit about both the experiences you've had with coaches, but also I know you've got quite strong views about moving forwards and what does the future of coaching look like. And yeah,
Mm,
if we are keen to explore that a little bit.
yeah, of course. I guess I start in the rugby space. So my first set of coaches at uni were Keith Hughes, Barry O'Neill, and Booker, who I still talk to now, are three absolutely incredible guys. And like you said, I guess that really set the foundation for my feelings and experience towards rugby. They're all completely different in, I guess, their personalities and the way that they coach, but fundamentally having that support and building that strong relationship, I think really helped to, I guess, progress my understanding and my ability in the rugby space. I'd also then maybe backtrack a bit because before I played rugby, I swam. So I swam from 7 to 15 and I progressed through county to Midlands up to national level. And I had like two main coaches over that time. So one was Sharpie, also known as Andy Sharp, who I think is now head of Northampton Swimming Club. And then the other was Jackie Marshall, who is pathway lead for Paralympic swimming at the moment. And the like reflecting on the relationships that I had with them, they were really great. Two completely different personalities again. And I think with Jackie, it was definitely a bit of push and pull. She was a really strong-minded coach who wouldn't really um, put up with rubbish, I would say, but also was very good at knowing, I guess, when to push, when to pull, when to take you in for a hug, when not to. And I was actually reflecting on it earlier. I remember we had diaries. So let's say this is probably from 10 to 15, and you had to write at the end of every session, you had to write an entry in your diary. And then I think, let's say every month, you'd hand it in to the coach and the coach would read it and then obviously write any comments or reflections that they had and then they'd give it back. And I just think that was such a powerful tool in terms of building that relationship, understanding your athlete as a person and why maybe they're acting in certain ways and what their thoughts are and reflections. And it was also powerful, I guess, from an individual point of view in having to sit down and actively reflect on each session that I did. Obviously, like towards the end of the career, I was doing about 8 sessions a week. So sitting down and thinking about why did this go well? Why did I enjoy that? How could I be better at this? I think really set a great foundation for me, not just in sport, but like in life.
Yeah, and I've no doubt we can dive into some of the threads around what you've taken from your sporting journey. I'm
Mm,
curious a little bit, again, being coached kind of in your late teens into your 20s, obviously that relationship and dynamic with a coach is perhaps very different to what it is when you're 12, 13, 14.
yeah,
So
for sure.
what are your reflections on that in terms of, I guess it's more of a two-way partnership because of being an adult effectively?
Yeah, I guess so. I think you could argue there's a fair bit more autonomy. And depending on where you're at and your relationship with, I guess, parents, etc., when you're an adult playing sport, um, and especially in the uni context, you choose if you want to turn up to training or not, right? And there's no parent that's taking you, picking you up, dropping you. You've got to make your way yourself and manage it amongst your other commitments, whether it's obviously studying, jobs, etc. So I think maybe the intention starts from a different place when you're older because by turning up and showing up, you're already, I guess, putting a certain amount of effort in yourself actively to say, look, I want to be here. Um, I guess how can we work together and how can you support me as well. Naturally, maybe there's more conversations around different ambitions when you're older. I think potentially when you're younger, um, it's more focused on like development and enjoyment and potentially also performance, right? Whereas when you're older, depending on the level that you're at, there might be different conversations. Certain people are maybe just here for the social, other people really want to push on. Some people are happy to stay at the level that they're at, and just play and kind of go through the motions. So I guess naturally you have the different priorities and different viewpoints of players all within the same high performance environment, which I guess is why having that strong relationship with the coaches, or if you're a coach with the players, is even more important to understand, I guess, what their drivers are, because it might be a bit more varied.
Well, obviously, a big part of that coaching experience that you've had has, by the sounds of it, shaped, your other project in terms of off the playing pitch yourself.
Mm.
Maybe just take us a little bit again through the journey of that from concept and idea and perhaps a notebook or a whiteboard to kind of what it is now and how that's evolved into what peak team performance has become.
Yeah, of course. So I guess I split peak team performance into three main areas. And I'll probably dive into each. So the first, I guess, is high performance, right? Then you've got well-being, and then you've got social connection. So if we start with the high performance space and angle, naturally I've been someone that's really ambitious and that really strives to perform as well as I can. I think for as long as I can remember. Um, I always remember my mum would always say, if you're going to do something, do it properly or don't do it at all. And that doing it properly really encompassed doing it to the best of your ability. I also have a very competitive family. So whether it was playing board games, playing basketball outside, my academics, or then obviously going into swimming and rugby, I've always been looking at how can we optimize? How can I maybe tweak that to do it slightly better to level up my performance and I guess ultimately win? So that's the high performance side. And I guess why I'm particularly interested and passionate in that. You've then got the well-being space, which I would say I've been active in and quite interested in for maybe 10 to 12 years. So when I was 15, my dad actually passed away as a result of a mistake that was made in what was meant to be a routine surgery. So I think at quite an early age, I got an exposure to the fragility of like life, both from a life and death point of view, but also just from things can change in a matter of minutes, and what maybe was the norm now is completely different to the reality that you live. And diving into emotional intelligence and empathy and getting a understanding of like what actively investing in your mental health and well-being looks like. And then so I did law at university, and then after that, I was able to do a postgraduate diploma in the psychology and neuroscience of mental health. So I did that part time whilst I was working at King's College, purely out of interest, to be honest, which I appreciate is a very privileged, like lucky position to be in, but also because I wanted to, I guess, transition into more of that mental health and wellbeing space, and to have the scientific knowledge behind that. And then I transitioned into mental health and wellbeing tech. So that's like apps, platforms, whether it's like your Calm, your Headspace, etc. A variety of B2B, so working with companies to help their employees, or B2C, so working with companies directly to support customers that buy stuff directly from them. So I guess that's where the well-being side of things comes together. And then the social connection side um, definitely links to the well-being. I think the COVID period was a really interesting one in lockdown. There was a lot of conversations around the power of social connection and how detrimental it can be to be lonely, to be isolated on the health of individuals, right? So that really came to the forefront there, and I did a lot of research in that space. And then transitioning it into the sporting landscape had um, quite a challenging experience in a high performance environment. And naturally, I'm quite a relaxed person, quite chilled, pretty confident. But I was going into this environment feeling really anxious, feeling scared of making mistakes, which obviously led to more mistakes. Um, I was like questioning my worth as both a player and an individual. And I guess for context, it was a really challenging time for me outside of rugby as well. I had been made redundant, and both my partner and my mum had been diagnosed with different forms of cancer about 6 months apart. So naturally, I guess it's important to contextualize. It was a challenging period all round, I remember sharing that with the people in that environment, and I didn't quite get the support that I was needed from a development point of view in the rugby space. And I think the comms that I needed for that development also wasn't there. Um, I always remember having a conversation because there was definitely a pool of us that were experiencing the same thing. And I remember that teammate saying, I can tell whether I'm on the team sheet for the weekend by when I walk in on a Monday, because if I've been selected, I'll be acknowledged and greeted by certain coaches. And if I haven't, then I'll be ignored. And I just thought that was crazy. So that kind of sparked my interest into understanding why that was such a challenging experience for me, and I guess the science behind how different relationships in high performance environments can affect the well-being and performance of athletes, which then led me to study social connection and psychology at Oxford. And I guess you put all of those three things together and you essentially get what we're doing at Peak Team Performance now.
That's awesome. And I guess you've obviously mentioned there around the challenging periods and that power of connection. And I think I can cast my mind back, and it's quite a long time ago now, but 2010, I think it was, my mum was diagnosed with cancer for the first time. And
Mm,
my coach, and bearing in mind I was training in a high performance environment at that point, said,
yeah.
go home. There wasn't even a discussion of, like training attendance. Just go home straight away.
Yeah.
No stress. I guess I ended up working within that program once I'd stopped competing myself. And 3 years later, that cancer came back. And I remember the head coach at that time and the director of swimming saying to me, go home. And that was
Mm,
twice of that experience that I've had people where, in a positive way, that
yeah.
connection has allowed, I guess, the bigger picture to be kept in perspective, because very often sport is quite insular. It's all about performance. And actually, there isn't that balanced approach that leads to good well-being for both the athlete and those around them. Whereas actually, if you've got people who model that, whether that's the coach, or other leaders in that environment, it's really, really powerful. And the fact you can reflect on that kind of, almost toxic aspect to the way that they are treating player well-being,
Mm,
with a view that performance is all that matters. And if you are not on, that bus with us, then this week, then we're not even going to acknowledge you. And that's just very powerful. So thank you for sharing that. But I guess, what does that look like moving forwards? What's your mission when it comes to what peak team performance are doing in terms of addressing environments like that?
mm. Yeah. I guess the mission going forward is to be the go-to brand or the go-to organization when it comes to performance environments and how you can best optimize them and get the most out of your team through obviously looking at the team dynamics and the relationships with senior people. And the format of that support definitely varies, whether it's community based work, so like coaches supporting and working with other coaches, we definitely know that there's like a lot of power and value in that. Or if it's more one to one support, um, I think key things that tend to resonate are being able to actually track the performance of essentially the social connection in an environment over time, and being able to really pinpoint the elements that need to be optimized and work with the environment, the coaches, the team, etc., to improve that. Um, because naturally, whether it's sport or business, the performance element is always going to be there, especially for people that are operating at the top end of their space. So it's just looking at how we can really optimize the well-being and performance together rather than feeling like it's either one or the other.
It's interesting because I think there's a lot of um, I'm going to say naive, or perhaps people that have just seen perhaps performance sport for a very singular lens, that don't perhaps appreciate the fact that it's not a player that walks out on a pitch, or an athlete that stands behind a block. It's a person, and
Yeah,
that mixing deck, if you like, of all the different aspects of their life, for them to achieve optimal performance, it requires balance. And certainly if you're looking at sustained performance, obviously in a team environment across a season, yes, you might be able to limp through one weekend if you've got a lot going on, but actually across a year, your performance of course is going to be affected by what's going on away from the pitch. So again, like, reflecting on what does that space look like moving forwards, I know you've been involved, and I know you're keen to explore the or the coaches circle, and that again is like an area for me around kind of this space around kind of communities of practice, good practice, sharing good practice, those sorts of things. So again, having been through that, the good and the bad yourself, are you happy to share like your insights on that?
yeah, of course. So I think the coaching landscape is quite a vast one. And there's not necessarily a clear you do this and then you do this and then you do this. Or when there is within qualifications, like formal qualifications, a lot of the time, a lot of the human side, which I think it's crazy that we even have to talk about the human side of coaching because coaching is largely ultimately driven by working with other people, right? But a lot of that isn't necessarily the content that's covered in those formal courses, right? So a lot of people do CPD courses or maybe look at building out their network and attending or watching other sports or speaking to other coaches. And I think that that connection and network piece is a big thing that we've heard from the coaches that we work with in terms of um, even if it's going to, let's say, a sport related conference, a lot of the value that the coaches then get is in the conversations after the conference, maybe at the bar or on the walk to the train station, etc. So with the coaches circle, it enables a space for coaches that do want to continue to develop and consider alternative approaches and just are quite curious about coaching practice to not only have um, the latest research insights, whether it's in sports coaching, sports psychology, or social connection, given to them in a very easy one-pager digestible format. There's also different coaching frameworks that we share. There's coach analysis related content, so diving into how different things can be optimized, whether it's communication or clarity of messaging, using theming, etc., as well as having spaces for reflection, on top of being able to connect with coaches across a variety of different sports that are all interested in developing and being in a performance space.
It's interesting because I look at the way that conferences are structured, and there was one that I went to just before we went into the lockdown that I'd say was probably one of the more innovative coaching conferences I'd ever been to.
Hmm.
That had maybe 5 or 6 strands going on at once. At least half of it was designed to be informal and just facilitate group work and conversation. So it might be, here's a topic, discuss,
Mm.
and that was the session. Um, And I think you're going to see more and more of that moving forward. If you look at the explosion of, ironically, we're talking on a podcast right now, but if you look at the way that podcast growth has allowed two, three, four people to sit down with microphones and just talk and then share that
Yeah,
conversation, that's opened a lot more. Um, I wouldn't say necessarily challenges, I'd say, but challenge to the way that things are done, because you
yeah,
have people that are, you know, peer or deliver a lot of peer-reviewed articles, very, very knowledgeable in the science of their space, whatever field they work in. But they're
mm,
coming together and saying, why do we do this? Why do we not challenge it? And often, as a player, for example, that's in that environment that doesn't feel that confident in challenging the order in inverted commas,
yeah,
actually, it's really important that we are creating spaces for coaches to share that information so that it does trickle down from, and like you said, the translatability of it, so that people can have a 50-page journal article that looks into something really important, but then actually it's translated well into a
yeah,
day-to-day coaching landscape where they haven't got time to look through, say, some of that academic spiel that, great content can actually get lost in. So awesome. I mean, I know we're bouncing across a load of areas. We've covered performance sport. We've talked around the coaching space, both from the environment that they create, but also looking after the coach themselves.
mhm,
Um, the social connection thing I think is really important, because if you look at the most successful performances in any field, it's usually there's a mentor, a coach, a leader, a supporter, and that relationship they have with that person is a huge part of why they get there. So, who on your journey have been those kind of? I know you've mentioned obviously Andy and Jackie, and then obviously your coaches when you went into the rugby program. But
mm,
who are the other key people kind of on your journey that have either given you advice, support, context, whatever it is that has just allowed you to kind of get to where you are now?
yeah. Um, it's a great question. I think that one of the coaches that I mentioned, Keith Hughes, from LSE, so my uni rugby, he is a key person for me. Not necessarily having hour-long talks and reflections, but I think he's just very consistent. He's always there. I still get a message from him before each game, um, basically saying good luck, or if I'm not on the team sheet for a couple of weeks, I'll get a message saying, "Are you injured or are you okay?" And I think that consistency of support is a big one, because I know if I need to talk to him about something, or I want to ask his opinion about something, he is there just by the way that he consistently shows up, for sure. Um, I think I'm also, it's great to have people that aren't in the rugby space or aren't in the sporting space or workspace that you operate in, to provide you with that perspective that we talked about earlier. So I think my brother is a good one. His sport is actually basketball, so we're still learning the rules of the rugby space, and he doesn't necessarily know who's who. But he is a very sound person for me to um, voice concerns or ask questions, and to help ground me, but also celebrate me. So yeah, I'd say he's also a key person for me that I lean on.
Fantastic. And I guess now, obviously, every step of the journey is always a chapter. You took stuff from swimming that you carried forward into university and rugby, and obviously now in your professional role now, and obviously the business side of things. So, what are your key reflections up to this point that you look back and you think those were key moments or traits or behaviors or experiences that have put me in the best stead to get where I am right now? Because I think it's very easy to say these things of, to get to this point, you need to do this and you need to do this. But now you're at this point and having gone on this journey, what are the bits that you look back and go, those were key things that have allowed me to get here?
Yeah. I think a belief in what you're doing is a big thing. I think the power of belief can be maybe understated sometimes, in being able to manifest what it is that you're trying to create. I think if you really have that belief in something, then to an extent it allows you to let go a little bit and try and just ride the wave and trust that you'll get there. Um, Obviously, belief isn't the be all and end all. I can't sit and believe and just sit here and not do any of the work, right? So there's definitely that balance of knowing that you're doing all that you can, or from a strategic point of view, to get to where it is that wherever it is that you're trying to get to. I'd also say the enjoyment of the journey is a big one, and maybe it gets talked about quite a lot. But naturally, when you're in a high performance space, there's always a lot of emphasis on getting to the next thing or achieving the next goal. Even if you've just achieved the goal that you've been working on for 10 years, it's then a lot of the time, okay, cool, what shall we do next? Which I think is very normal, and quite healthy for people, and definitely for people that are really ambitious. But I'd say making sure that you do enjoy the process along the way. And um, for me, like basic things such as, I guess, daily gratitude stuff. So going to bed and thinking about three things that you're grateful for, I think can really ground you in appreciating the small things and the small achievements, whilst still striving for the bigger things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And the daily gratitude stuff, and that kind of stoicism piece. I'm thinking of quite a few Ryan Holiday books that jump out on me as being big in
Yeah,
that area. And then one of the other things you mentioned there around enjoying the journey and why that is so important. Again, I'm thinking back to a podcast I heard a little bit earlier this year with Alistair Brownlee, and he was talking about these kind of post-journey reflections. He's announced his retirement, and
yeah,
he said, I've won 2 Olympic gold medals, and I can tell you the medals alone are not worth it. He said it
mm,
was the hard training sessions, the days where you didn't want to get up and you work your way through it, the days when you picked yourself up or you picked those up around you, and the connections and the people and the coaches and everyone that comes with you on this journey. And, we hear it all the time, like you said, but I think it's a lot easier said than done. We can
mm,
say, like, we want a fun environment, we want this, we want everyone to appreciate the process. It's not all about outcome. But then when you actually go in and observe it, and you go, no, this is 100% outcome driven, there is no
yeah,
focus at all on the process. So I guess, you mentioned there around enjoying it. If you could go
mm,
back to, 8, 9, 10-year-old Tiana, just diving into the pool and kind of figuring out the sporting space for the first time, what would you go
mm.
back and say to her?
That's a great question. What would I say? I'm actually quite stumped. I think a big thing, which kind of echoes, I guess, what I mentioned a moment ago, but is celebrating those small wins. Um, because environments can be, like you said, very outcome driven. And it is important to have those bigger goals because it gives you clarity on what you're working towards. But I think when you achieve those small wins, definitely to like acknowledge it and enjoy it. Um, I'd also say, I think it was Maro Toje that maybe said this, and it was like, when you're winning or doing well, things are never as good as you think, and when you're losing or struggling, things are never as bad as you think. And I think that is really good because definitely in my younger years, naturally from being competitive and quite ambitious, obviously if you win you're over the moon, and then if you lose it's the end of the world, right? So I think, of course, being 10, whether I would have taken that advice on board is questionable, but I think that is really a really nice thing to remember, and I try to remember it now, because especially in sport, in that moment, whether it's right at the end of the game, you think that's it, and oh, I had such a bad performance and etc. But the reality is, on Monday you're going to go on to focus about the next game, and the intensity of those emotions will naturally wane. And it doesn't mean that it's not important, but it's just having that context to be able to step back and know that it's not as bad as you think, or it's not as good as you think. Like, keep working.
I love that. And it makes me reflect. I did an event down in the southwest of England back in February, and we had a few pro athletes with us, but one of them's an incredible athlete, 3-time Olympic gold medalist, and a 12-year-old asked a question of, what would your message be to us? We're still young, we're still getting engaged in it. And he said something very similar, and I want to get the wording right. It was, don't let the losses go to your heart and don't let the wins go to your head. And I was like,
Yeah,
I like that, because,
yeah,
both happen. You don't get, no one gets a win without the losses on the way, and losses don't last indefinitely. There is always a win, like you said. Find the small wins every single day and find the things you're grateful for. So I don't know
mm,
if there's any other areas or anything else you want to touch upon, Tiana, before we wrap this up, because we've covered so many range of things. I'm not sure if there's anything you want to dive into a little bit deeper.
It's a great question. Um, I guess the only other thing maybe in terms of um, social connection and performance is so what we call like the ship analogy, which I think is a really good way to, I guess, underpin why relationships are so important to unlocking high levels of performance, right? So if you look at a ship um, as our analogy for a high performance environment, right? Each season, we can use that as each journey. You're looking to achieve a certain thing, so you're looking to get to a certain destination, right? And you've got the captain, who in our case is the head coach. You've maybe got some co-captains or some other senior people who are the other coaches in the environment, the physios, the support staff, etc. And then you've got the crew, who are the players, who ultimately do the real bulk of the work to get us to where we need to be, right? And it's imperative that everyone is singing off the same hymn sheet if we're going to be able to get to the destination that we're trying to get to in an effective and efficient way, right? Because if you've got the captain saying something to the crew, and telling them to do X, but you've got the co-captains telling the crew to do Y, or you've got me as a member of the crew, and I think that my role is to do Z, but then Kevin, you've told me that actually I should be doing A, and then the captain has told me that I should be doing B. Naturally, we're all pulling in different directions, right? And then you've got, from the relationship point of view, when you look at elements of trust, it's important that me and you, as members of the crew, trust in and believe in the vision and um, the behavior and the values of the captain. Because if I believe and I follow what the captain's saying, but you don't believe and you're a bit more half-hearted, or potentially don't do what was meant to be your role, again, naturally, we're not going to be as efficient or as effective as possible, right? And everything that underpins what I've just kind of laid out is fundamentally the relationships that I have with the crew, the relationships that I have with the senior managers and the co-captains, and the relationship ultimately that I have with the captain. And I think that's quite a good way to transform or translate high performance, and why relationships are just so crucial to getting to where you want to get to.
I'm sure organisations, whether it's sports teams or anywhere else that you work with, peak team performance, the idea is effectively to everyone to understand what their ship is, what the roles are, make sure everyone is on the same page, because ultimately performance doesn't happen by chance. And I think often people want the quick, easy answer, and actually
Mm,
it's a huge, complex, moving animal. And understanding that and orchestrating it, and constantly adapting and communicating with your team to make sure everyone is continually on the same page is that kind of complete essence of what high performance is. So that's a kind of really cool way to pull it all together. And obviously we'll link in the show notes everything you're up to, website, socials, etc., etc. And I'm sure people will want to follow up with you directly. But Tiana, it's been fascinating. And I think one of the things when I do my day job and I speak to a hell of a lot of swimming parents, I talk about the fact that swimming will take you places and you can never predict where the places that it will take you. And now I'm sitting here with, a professional rugby player talking about, their journey from, the aquatic space and how they are now reflecting on, supporting teams in multiple sports and all these sorts of things. It's kind of the destination that a lot of young people don't know where they're heading. You're sitting here going, hey, this is where it could be. So,
Yeah.
it's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.
A big thank you again to Tiana for sharing some time with me today and dropping some amazing insights from her journey. You can connect with her through the links in the show notes and see what she continues to be up to moving forwards. Don't forget to subscribe and share the show with anyone that could use a little inspiration. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Road Monkey Podcast.